COVID is front and center for your World Bank, different than the IMF, different than the World Health Organization. I want to know what you've learned on the efficacy of masks.
Hi, Tom. Good morning. Well, I think the masks are helping where in lots of parts of the world. One thing we did starting in April was to create programs where countries could choose the different protective equipment that they wanted to buy with financing that we could provide. And so that's been a very successful program because it gives the choice to the countries, and there's a variety of activities going on in order to counter the response. And what we've done, what I did this week was announce the expansion of that program. My board is looking at it now to cover vaccines. So a critical thing for countries is that they begin to respond fully to the crisis and get people back into their livelihoods. That's critical because the poverty rates are going up so fast.
David, you know, across this nation, there's cultural differences in the wearing of masks. I know, David, at Colorado College, there's 100% usage of masks at all time. John Ferro mentions the variability of mask usage in the United Kingdom. Right now, India is front and center. What has the World Bank learned about India's protective abilities?
Well, the COVID is a giant catastrophe, especially for the poorest people. As the economy shut down, people that were in the informal economy didn't really have the ability to buy protective equipment, masks, and they didn't have an ability to have social distancing or space. So India's hit particularly hard, but what I observe is waves of infection in the developing world. So it's a very challenging environment. One of the problems is children are out of school, and we think there are 1 billion children out of school, and they have the problem that they move backward in learning when they aren't going forward, when they're not in school. So we have sizable programs to try to help make schools safe and begin allowing people back to school when it's safe and when they're ready, wearing masks.
David, you raise an incredible point, this idea of the toll that this has taken on the least advantaged, both in the United States, but frankly, around the world. We've had Ken Rogoff, we've had Mohamed El-Erian come out and talk about how this emerging world is facing a debt crisis, a social crisis. How much oxygen does the drama in the developed world, with the U.S. election, with the virus getting worse in certain locations, take out of the room from getting aid from some of these wealthier nations and getting it to those that need it?
I would say the wealthier nations have been generous, and one of the challenges is using the aid that is available most as productively as possible. Countries need efficient systems to do the distribution of the equipment, and also if vaccines become available, that's actually a complicated process to actually vaccinate a lot of people. So we're beginning that preparation phase, or working with countries so that they'll be ready if there's a vaccine. But you're exactly right. The inequality of this extends. There's many aspects. One is a lot of developing countries relied heavily on remittances from workers that worked across the border somewhere else, and that flow has slowed down. The biggest problem is their markets have severely declined. So for Africa, they were used to shipping products to Europe. There's just not as much demand. The good news, I would say, is that economies in the advanced countries are showing recovery. If you look at the quarter-over-quarter kind of data, and so that's a start, and that will help the developing countries a lot. I would say there's generosity in the world. The complication is COVID is a really bad virus, and so that's just hammering poor people.
David, how on board has China been with extending aid to the developing world, given that they've emerged as one of the largest lenders to the EM complex?
It's several aspects of that. Right at the putting aside where the source origin of the virus, in April and May, they extended the helping hand somewhat to the developing world. So that's important. They had manufacturing equipment for some of the aid, so that's good. The U.S. did that, Europe did that, and so I welcome that. You're right that China has been one of the biggest lenders to the developing world over the last maybe 5 years or 10 years. And so that's a real challenge because some of it comes from a variety of Chinese policy banks and commercial banks and government agencies. Some of them are still taking payments from the poorest countries. I in March, suggested a moratorium for bilateral official creditors so that they would stop taking payments. Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, and I pushed that, and the G20 endorsed it, and many of the creditors have stopped taking payments from the poorest countries. But unfortunately, commercial creditors are still taking those payments. That means banks, hedge funds, asset managers, and a few of the Chinese agencies are not fully participating. And they're some of the largest creditors. We're talking giant billions and billions in flows that are still coming out of the poorest countries.